The last time I felt that the world had changed around me this much was when Google was launched.
Oh, wow.
Google
Okay.
Search, and that was at google.stanford.edu. This basically means I never need to learn stuff. I can look up anything.
Right.
And with LLMs coming in, now I realize, shit, I never need to think. I just need to learn how to get things to think for me.
Hi, Anand, and welcome to our show Leading with Data. And thanks for taking time out from your busy schedule and the travel which has been ongoing for you. But really looking forward to the discussion. For our audience, Anand is someone who has been there with our community for now last 5 years or probably longer. Actually, I've been at Data Hack Summit since 2017, and I've loved every session you have done at Data Hack Summit and in each of your talks. So I hope I'll walk out with some insights about how to create that magic by end of the discussion today. So welcome, Anand.
Thanks for having me, Kunal.
Great. So Anand, I'll actually start at your talks and the magic you create. So I've now, as I said, I think I've attended probably 4 or 5 talks on Data Hack Summit. A few others you had done. I think I'd attended one at Fifth Elephant, if I'm not wrong, and then a few online sessions as well. And every time I just walk out being wowed about how you go about narrating the story and the visualizations. So can you walk us through what goes behind creating these talks, and how do you approach it? So assuming, let's say that you have to create a talk on a new topic or a new story you have in mind, how do you go about doing it, and then what does the process or the how does it evolve over time? It would be great to hear that.
There are usually two kinds of talks that I deliver.
Mhm.
One that is aimed at teaching, and the other that is aimed at learning.
Okay.
The learning talk is where I pick something that I don't know enough about. I say,
Mhm.
I've got to become good enough to be a master at this topic, and that's why I'm
Mhm.
effectively picking that topic.
Okay. Mhm.
And it gives me a deadline. It almost gives me a,
Very interesting.
a slot or a schedule to work against.
Mhm.
Those talks are usually hit and miss in the sense that the stories that come out of that may not be good because I'm trying them out for the first time. But
Mhm.
that's what provides the raw material for many of my subsequent talks because I know what aspect worked, what aspect doesn't work.
Mhm.
And I will be conscious of the use of the word aspect because it's not that a talk or the material itself doesn't work. Some things will work, some things will not. And it's about discovering what works. So,
Mhm.
put another way, I get raw material for talks and raw material for creating stories by
Mhm.
trying out new areas. And in the process, I also get the benefit of learning something new.
Mhm. Mhm.
The second kind of talk is where I aim to teach, and that is assembling what has worked well in many of my earlier talks, picking just the parts that were interesting and
Mhm.
stitching it together into the final talk.
Okay.
What
Mhm.
is interesting in a talk may not necessarily be even content related. To give you an
Right.
example,
Mhm.
uh, I was exploring a talk
Mhm.
on the use of comic characters.
Okay.
And
Mhm.
it struck me that while there are many interesting things about automating comic characters, one particular story particularly resonated both with me and the audience, which
Mhm.
is that as a kid, I wanted to draw cartoons for
Right.
Disney.
Yeah.
And the reality is, I can't, if you put a gun to my head, I can't draw. So
Right.
I gave up. But because I put together, along with my colleagues, this comic generation API, and I
Yeah.
was effectively using their drawing skills combined with my programming skills,
Mhm.
which happened to be used at Star TV, which got
Okay.
acquired by Fox, which got
Mhm.
acquired by Disney. I
Wow.
ended up drawing for Disney in a very
Wow,
indirect way.
that's amazing.
Now, here's the thing, This is an interesting story, but has absolutely nothing to do with the technology behind or the
Correct.
data behind the talk itself. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I mean when I say it's not that the storyline necessarily has to be something that strengthens the content directly. It can be something that augments the content in a different way. And it literally is a story around it. So I try these out, whichever works, distill those, and then it gets into the talk, which basically means two things go into supporting many of my talks. One is the quantum of raw material that goes in experimentation and trying out with different audiences and with different topics. The
Yeah.
second is a certain amount of creativity in going beyond what the content itself is about
Mm-hmm.
and taking the liberty to stitch together unusual stories.
Right, right. And just want to maybe go a level deeper, right? Uh, I'm presuming a lot of what you do in the talks where you are learning would ultimately go into the teaching talks. So let's pick up the learning talk. There, again, as a process, do you kind of do as much research first, or you, let's say, stitch a story and then find the data points? I mean, how does the actual creation or the research phase happen?
What I find is that purpose driven learning works better than systematic learning. What I mean
Mhm.
by that is if I picked up a book
Right.
or an API site and go through it end to end, I learn less than if I pick up a problem and try and solve it.
Hmm.
I also find that if I pick a problem that I'm interested in, I'm more likely to get to the solution than a problem that I'm just making up.
Right.
So, my first task is to figure out a problem that I want to solve for
Hmm.
whatever reason. For
Yeah.
example, I decided that I need to learn social network analysis.
Hmm.
So, the first part was figuring out what kind of social network problem would I care about. And
Right.
one of the answers that came to me just for no explicit reason is if Govinda wants to act with Angelina Jolie, what is the
Wow.
network of actors that he would connect with to get him
Hmm.
to Angelina Jolie? And now my initial thought was not necessarily Govinda and Angelina Jolie. I probably started off with Rajinikanth at someone else in some shape or form. But
Okay.
I just eventually said, okay, how would two actors connect with each other? And a
Hmm.
related question: who are the actors who crossed over from the north to the south or who are in between multiple regions? I
Hmm.
want to know the answers to these questions. So I said,
Right.
okay, now I have a problem. Let's go about solving it, which is the
Hmm.
second. And the
Right.
second part is a whole lot easier
Right.
because now I have something that I'm interested in. I
Hmm.
have something that is also related to the topic. The rest is
Hmm.
just figuring it out.
Right. And in this phase, you've almost started taking the creative liberty, which you kind of mentioned. So this happens at the start when you're also just thinking about the research. So the story formation and some of these dimensions, maybe in which you want to explore, that happens at the start. Is that how it works, or that evolves? I mean,
When it's a talk that I'm planning to learn about,
mhm, mhm,
if it's a teaching talk, it works the other way because I already have the raw material. And
mhm.
then I think about how do I stitch it together to form an interesting story. For
Okay.
example, one of the
Mhm,
TEDx talks that I gave, it was TEDx Whitefield, if I remember right, was
mhm,
uh, I honestly had no idea what the theme was going to be. So I said,
mhm,
let's look at all of the interesting anecdotes, examples, data sets, stories that I have, put it
mhm,
together, and what is an interesting way of stitching it together. Now, I've worked a fair bit on education. I've worked a fair bit on politics. I've worked a fair bit on a variety of public topics, geospatial analysis. And so, when threading through this, it struck me that one thing that I can stitch together as a common topic is when a person was born,
mhm.
where a person was born, how a
Mhm.
person was born, what a person is born as, how all of these affect them in each phase of life.
Right.
So the theme ended up being how your birth determines your life.
Wow.
Now, that's a case where I get to the topic, by picking from raw materials and then do a little bit of filtering to say, okay, this fits the topic well, this doesn't fit the topic well. Summarize, if it's something that I'm looking to learn, I pick an interesting problem first. If it's something that I'm looking to teach, then I pick the base and then stitch together what is the interesting story around it.
Right. And between the two phases, and maybe they're interrelated, so there aren't two phases. Uh, in terms of how the talk comes out, which is more kind of impactful? So is it that getting these questions is the most critical part, or is it that that creative liberty, or just what are those dimensions where you would want to explore? That's usually the most so what's the most critical part in the process, and then where do you I mean, where would you want to focus the most in order to bring the talk out in the most impactful manner?
Got it. I don't know, and I think it may vary from person to person. Let me
Hmm.
explain. There are a number of data visualization stories that I've created over the last uh, close to a decade, decade and a half.
Yeah.
And yet, a few of the stories that I had created in 2011,
Hmm.
including, for instance, a visual analysis of the Mahabharata and an
Right.
analysis of birth dates, are stories that people still remember more so than almost any of the stories that are told later on,
Right.
which tells me that the content totally matters.
Right. Hmm.
Having said that, what I've also realized is that a big part of it was because of the way some of those stories were told. For
Right.
example, when I would tell people that elder children tend to score more, they'd say, yeah, I could have guessed that. So I
Yeah.
changed the narrative to say, do you think the sun sign affects the marks of a child? At which
Hmm.
point I start to think, yeah, no, that can't be. And the reality is, yes, it does, which makes it a hell of a lot more memorable. When I
Right.
talk about the network of the closeness of characters in the Mahabharata, it's interesting.
Hmm.
But it's only when I started narrating it as, let's find out which Pandava is Draupadi's favorite, that
Hmm.
it started becoming more memorable. And therefore,
Hmm.
the how you tell it clearly has a strong impact. And what I found is that people sometimes remember the how I tell more than the content. Like, for
Right.
instance, mentioned that I therefore draw for Disney. People don't remember the content of the talk, but they do remember
Hmm.
that I achieved a childhood ambition through something to do with technology and nothing to do with drawing, actually.
Yeah.
To your question, which of these is more important? I don't know. I haven't been able to figure out a pattern, but I do believe that one can definitely compensate for the other. So
Hmm.
even if someone has a poor style, or even if someone has poor content, I believe that
Hmm.
you can quite, with some effort, you know,
Hmm.
offset the deficit quite well.
Got it. Got it. Great. So essentially, in the learning talks, you spend the time researching about it, where some of these creative questions come in, and once the, let's say, storyline is ready, that is when you would spend time on what's the best way to bring it out and then narrate the story. So there is explicit kind of thought on what could be the best way to bring out these to fine tune the story. Right.
Absolutely. In fact, there are a number of talks which I give that I prepare for just an hour before the talk. It's usually on the taxi ride to the place. And
Mhm,
the only thing that I do at that time is write down the storyline. The
mhm,
content is all there. It's usually just demos. I just need to know in what order to jump across those. For which
mhm,
the only thing that's required is the storyline. So that is certainly a critical element. If
mhm,
if someone has a good storyline, which is literally the titles of the slides that you're going to be talking about, and
mhm.
just narrating that storyline can cause an impact. The rest is detail.
Right, and very interesting. And does this change when you're doing the teaching talks? I mean, obviously the mode has changed because you now are stitching different things. But I mean, do they necessarily come together coherently to form a overall story? Because these are kind of modular pieces you're bringing it together.
Yeah, no, and part of the trick is in figuring out something that
Mm,
is coherent. That is one
mm,
half of it. But the reality is, given a heterogeneous bunch of topics, No one theme will fit them perfectly.
Correct.
After that, it's two steps. Step
Mm-hmm.
one, drop what doesn't fit.
Mm-hmm.
Second, make what is remaining fit better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you take specific aspects of an analysis and talk about it.
Yeah.
To give an example, we were working with Karnataka marks data and
Mm-hmm.
found a variety of interesting things, like government schools tend to be on average worse than private schools in terms of marks. But
Mm-hmm.
the best government schools are on par with the best private schools, which is a useful and interesting piece of analysis, but is something that I discarded because it did not fit with the theme of my TEDx Whitefield talk, which was how your birth shapes your life.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Instead, what I took was that aspect of the Karnataka marks analysis where children born in coastal Karnataka score higher than children born in central Karnataka. And
Interesting.
that fits because I can talk about the place of birth influencing your life.
Right. Right.
That's what I mean by making a topic fit a theme.
Got it. Got it. Great. And so these are essentially the talks which you're doing in an open kind of subject. Uh, how much does that translate in terms of the workflow, etc. In let's say the work which you do with your clients? Does the process kind of remain same, or it's a very different setup? So you.
It's 50% different. There
Mhm.
are clients for whom we do almost exactly the same kind of work, just that it's with private data.
Right.
So, for example, a medtech company said, we want to reduce our distribution cost.
Hmm.
Great. So, how does one go about doing that? And for me, it's again, the first step is the learning process. So, I
Yeah.
was curious, who are the customers who will be impacted if they try to reduce the overall cost, and how is it that they can go about reducing the cost for sending it to a customer? So I started playing around, found that there is one particular case where on a given day, from
Hmm.
the same location to the same location, for the same customer, for the same medicine, for from using the same carrier, using the exact same route, there were 32 shipments on one day.
Okay.
Crazy. I mean, look, that's like calling the FedEx guy 32 times to your house and saying, look, to that particular house, I have 32 parcels, but I will call you 32 times,
32 names. Doesn't. Yeah.
which is crazy. Now, here is the thing, it forms a story only when I get to some point where I say, that's crazy.
That's crazy. Yeah.
Why would that ever happen? Only then it becomes memorable.
Mhm.
So it's exactly the same process, just with private data, and then convert it into an application that delivers the same story that I would narrate in some kind of, say, storytelling form. But
Mhm.
that is only 50% of what we do with clients, because the other 50% is while in a talk, people expect a finished product.
Yeah.
While working with clients, they expect two things that are different. One, to be involved as part of the process. So there's a lot of work in process output that goes along.
Correct.
Second, it is the ability for them to be able to deliver such insights. So
Mhm.
quite often they say, give me the raw material for me to be able to play around. I don't want you to come up with the answer. I want me to be able to come up with the answer.
Yeah. Mhm.
So when it
Correct.
comes to that, what we do is more tool building or solution building that empowers them to find the story and narrate the story. In that sense, it is different.
Okay. And then for that specifically, right? So if you're, let's say, building a tool or a dashboard for a client to bring out those stories, how does that process work? So do you focus on a few specific questions which the client would want to answer, or it would be a mix of, let's say, exploratory data as well as some insightful questions? So how does that happen?
Um, the it's a mix,
Mhm.
and it's unfortunately hard to figure out which of these we should go for:
Correct.
answering a question or exploration. But in both cases, we need
Mhm.
some clarity on what problem the person is trying to solve.
Right.
So
Mhm.
let's start with what I call explanatory dashboards
Mhm.
versus exploratory dashboards.
Right.
In
Mhm.
an explanatory dashboard, there is a specific problem that the person is trying to solve, hopefully, which will lead to a specific action which will have an impact. And it's important that we get to know what that is. so that everything is aligned towards that one objective. For example, let's say it's a real estate company that owns a bunch of hotels and is trying to decide which hotels I should hold and which hotels I should divest or sell.
Mhm.
In that case, there is only one thing that we want them to know, which is hold these and sell these and why. So the entire decision making process is structured in a way that they can answer that question, what should I do and why is that the right choice in a sequence. Now figuring this out is non-trivial. Quite
Yeah.
often the client doesn't know it, that this is what
Mhm.
they want.
They
But
want.
if we figure it out and we execute effectively against it, it becomes a hit.
Mhm.
The second scenario, which is exploratory, is where the client says, I don't want to solve a problem. I want the capability to solve a problem. That
Right.
becomes tricky
Very.
because
Yeah.
then we have to enable a wide variety of interactions. And
Mhm.
over the years, we've learned what kinds of interactions people usually want at what stage.
Mhm. Mhm.
For example, Excel is a great tool
Yeah.
and caters to just so many needs that in many of the cases, what people really need is Excel that can work on top of their data and their business logic. It may be
Correct.
larger than what Excel can hold, and it may be far more complex than what Excel can hold, but that's exactly what they want. For example, somebody may say, look, what I need is a pivot table of all of the reviews about my product
Mhm.
versus a whole bunch of topics.
Sure. Mhm.
Except that if I had the raw data, I'd be able to do it, but I don't really have those numbers. So I want a
Mhm.
machine learning system to be able to figure out this review actually belongs 85% to this topic, only 20% to this topic, and so on. So fill out the
Correct.
numbers using some kind of magic or AI or whatever. But I really just need an Excel sheet because from there I know exactly what to do. Fair
Right.
enough. In that case, all of the capabilities that one needs to provide in an exploratory dashboard are sorting, filtering, searching, pivoting, grouping, charting, all of that kind of
And
stuff. But
algorithm which is coming up with that numbers. Yeah.
exactly, which is the precursor to it.
Right.
The same thing would work in, for instance, somebody may say, "Look, what I want is I've got a bunch of a table of numbers in
Mhm.
hundreds of PDF files. I want to extract that, and then I kind of know what to do.
Mhm.
In
Mhm.
which case, we are providing capability to do certain things. In those cases, it is relatively hard to say, give me the problem that you're going to solve. They
Right.
don't know. And we need
Mhm.
to take that next level of maturity to say, here are the ways in which they can solve the kinds of problems. And
Right.
for them.
Mhm. And does that become a challenge? Because I mean, for example, in some of the discussions with some of the projects I have been involved with, it usually ends up being a very open question. For example, in one of the insurance companies we were working with, they said we would want to look at every possible interaction effect with agent demographics. So based on whether the agent is from a particular city, where they, how much time they spend there, what kind of car do they drive, and then potentially a lot more other vectors, ultimately linking to the performance or how the agents are. So how do you kind of zero down on what could go in the dashboard, or what does the process look like?
If it is completely open-ended, in other words, somebody said, here is the data, now build what you will, then we've narrowed this down to a bunch of principles, which incidentally, a part of which was the subject of my last Data Hack Summit talk,
Yeah.
uh, was here is what people are invariably interested in. They
Hmm.
want the capability to find out which is most important, which means
Yeah.
everything should be sortable. Everything.
Right.
They want the capability to zoom in into a particular area, which means everything should be filtered.
Right.
They want the capability to be able to find a specific needle in the haystack, which means that all the way across the hierarchy, we should be able to search, but it's not just any arbitrary search, it's an incremental search, search as I type. And the reason
Right.
that's important is because as I progressively uh, go further, I will discover adjacencies that I'm not earlier aware of, and I may discover that, for example, I'm spelling it wrong. And the search as you type, when I hit that wrong character, I say, oh, this is where I made a mistake. So that becomes pretty powerful. I want the capability to be able to highlight pretty much any of the details. Put another way, I want not, I may be initially interested in one particular column. So let's say what's the sales. But when I find that something has a relatively low sales, I want to know whether that's because the sales was low or the returns were high. So I want the ability to add those details around it. So what I just did was listed four principles, which is sort everything, filter progressively, search incrementally, and highlight details, which you would want to include in any dashboard that has full capability. And there are four more that are slightly more advanced, which I think are again part of the common capability. It's a trade-off, however, to say, do we want to provide people with all of these capabilities in the dashboard itself, or could they just export after they've gotten a first cut and put it
Right.
into this Tableau and play around with that?
Yeah.
That means, in the sense that there are several good tools for pure exploratory analysis, or just take it into a Jupyter notebook. So quite often we end up coming up with a two-phase approach to exploratory analysis, where the first phase is about extracting the right subset of data, which is something that the other tools may not do. Which maybe, for instance, just do OCR, do a round of filtering, do a round of summarization in any kind of exploratory way, and then push it into maybe Excel, where they download and analyze it however they want. That's a good option too. To summarize, there are a set of principles that one can apply for any kind of good dashboard,
Right.
exploratory dashboard. But you don't necessarily need to go the whole hog. You may choose another tool as a second phase.
Yeah. And then you can also choose which out of, let's say, these 8 principles would you are more critical, and then you would want to use depending on.
Exactly.
Great. Very. This has been there on my mind with in terms of use of generative AI. I mean, there are a whole lot of different use cases, but what I want to focus on is, as someone who is, really great at building these visualizations and data stories, how has been your experiments with generative AI, and then, how do you feel about it?
The last time I felt that the world had changed around me this much was when Google was launched.
Oh, wow.
Google
Okay.
Search, and that was at google.stanford.edu. This basically means I never need to learn stuff. I can look up anything.
Right.
And with LLMs coming in, now I realize, shit, I never need to think. I just need to learn how to get things to think for me.
Correct. Correct.
It is that transformational. So, how do I see it changing the way I work? By and large, I've stopped coding. I just tell LLMs to code for me. And there have been a few applications that have built that are 100% LLM generated. I was looking at a multi-trend chart. I said, given this kind of a data format, generate a chart that will that will draw a line through each one of these categories. And it did. Then I added a comment. I tried that out. This is fine. But what I actually want is to draw circles at each one of those nodes, and the size of the circle should be based on this data. It made that change. Now, fine. I want a tooltip when I hover over those circles. It did it. Look, this isn't quite working well. When I hover over something, I have to hover exactly over it, and some of those circles are small. So change it so that no matter where I am, it finds the closest circle and hovers over that. It did that. And it did it in a way that was computationally expensive. So I'm experienced enough to know that that's going to be slow. So I said, no, don't use that. Use a quadtree algorithm to do that. So modify this program to use a quadtree algorithm. And it did. In other words, I did not write a single line of code.
Right.
And the solution works beautifully.
Beautifully.
And this is one kind of assistant. So the way
Okay.
I'm thinking about it is what generative AI has given me, specifically large language models, is the ability to create assistants.
Right.
So in this particular case, I just created an assistant who will code for me. And I can create many such assistants. I can create an assistant for any of a series of different topics. So one of the common tasks that comes to me is, given I actually cited this as an example. So given a topic, or given, let's say, a feedback, find out which topic this is closest to. or
Okay.
fuzzy matching. I have a column of customers from source A, I have a column of customers from source B. Normally, what I do is we look up, but it
Right.
needs to be fuzzy, so I do some transformations, blah, blah, blah. Now,
Yeah.
instead, I tell this assistant, here is column A, here is column B. Find the best matches, knowing that A is a subset of B mostly. And it tries it. We can do smarter things with embeddings and so on, but it ultimately gets the job done. That's a different kind of assistant.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I also use it to create ideas for me. I want to learn by experimenting. So I use it as a self-help coach, and I
Right.
create a self-help coach assistant.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if that is the case, I'm only limited by my imagination in the kind of assistance that I need, which is
Correct.
particularly a problem for me because I'm the kind of person who would not ask for help. Even if I'm stranded, lost in a desert, I won't ask for directions.
Right. Right.
Is the change that I'm trying to get to. I mean, in 2098, when Google Stanford.edu was launched, I decided that I need to make the transition from knowing to being able to discover.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Now I need to make the transition from thinking to be able to guide thinking.
Guide thinking. Correct. Correct.
It's going to be powerful.
It is going to be powerful. And then, uh, uh, yeah, there are all sort of these assistants which you can think of, starting from maybe the research part, for example, right?
Yeah.
Or the creative ideas or dimensions that, just through 10 interesting ideas. So I guess, the key question is how to use this technology to create assistance, which you're saying that, how do I guide? So that's true. Uh, Great. And any particular stories where you've used this more inherently lately, and then how did they come out compared to? So what was the overall impact? Was it on, let's say, better quality of stories, or the time shrunk, or maybe mix of both, in terms of the overall impact?
Let's take both, but both of these are, in some sense, incremental, and the power of incrementality is sometimes missed.
Mhm.
Let me explain. I think it was a McKinsey article that explained one impact of AI dramatically, which is that it's simply economics. AI lowers the cost of doing certain things.
Mhm.
And when something has a lower cost, a lot more things become worth doing.
Right. Mhm. Mhm.
If I had to, let's say, improve, okay, so let's take an example. Now, I read about one book a week.
Yeah.
Ideally, I would remember the stuff, but the reality is I probably remember less than 1%. But I usually remember, oh, there was something in one of my books that I read somewhere. I can't remember what it was, but it had to do with how to build the habit of exercising, some such thing. I would love to be able to search my memory or my notes for this. Now, today, it is economical to be able to do that because I can go to an LLM and say, write me a program that will index my books and my notes and answer questions, and use that to actually run the application. So now I have effectively all of my memory and all of my learning converted into a knowledge base. The only reason this is possible now, or it's only reason it's possible now. Earlier, I could have done it too. It would have taken
Mm.
me 10 hours.
Right.
Now it will take me 1 hour.
Mhm.
That's it.
Mhm.
It's just a 9 hour saving. But the thing is, at 10 hours, I couldn't spare the time.
Yeah.
At one
Yeah.
hour, I can.
I
And
can.
it is the difference between impossible to possible.
Possible.
Usually
Correct.
because there is that kind of a cutoff. So yes, you're right. It's just that there is better quality and there is lower effort. But because of that lower quality and lower effort, the ROI or the threshold is breached for so many things that there is an explosion of new stuff that people do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that is true. That is true. Uh, Coming back to, one of the points which you kind of mentioned before, and I wanted to kind of go deeper in that, and that was the comic generator which you had created. So, uh, how did that start, and then how did kind of a inspiration to create a tool like that came out?
So
And
yeah, we had some pretty bizarre characters in Gramener. So
Hmm,
Richie, who used to head our Story Labs team, he'd
mhm,
always been interested in creating comic characters for as part of our data visualization. And we felt he was interested in practically every kind of unusual visual representation we could think of.
hmm,
And we had another colleague, Ramya, who, along with a few of her design team colleagues, just one day decided to decorate an entire wall in Gramener with comic characters.
okay.
We looked at it and said, okay, so clearly we have people who can draw and
Hmm,
people who want to but cannot draw, but on the other hand can code. What does it take to get that skill into something that's reusable? And the insight that made the difference was we said, what if we could predefine a bunch of emotions and
mhm,
predefine a bunch of poses and create
exactly.
characters that can combinatorially match? In
Right.
which case, we get a wide variety of characters for a lot less effort. If I have a 10 by 10, I draw 20 characters, but I get 100 characters.
Correct. Mhm, mhm.
And that became what is now the most popular site on Gramener.com, which is Comic Gen.
Right.
Yeah, and since then, it has become an open source API to generate comics of a variety of different kinds. And then they started expanding the character base. They said, okay, now we need some more variety. We need a woman. We need a teapot. We need Biden and Trump, all kinds.
Yeah, yeah. And uh, uh, in terms of just I mean, they still look like very different, capabilities. So, a kind of generating these ideas and then productionizing it. So when did that bridge get created, or I mean, did it happen over time, or was it like a instant when this question came up in your mind? So how did that happen?
Oh, it took years. And
Hmm.
the way I see it, it's not that there is any shortage of interesting or creative ideas. At any given point, anyone, anywhere will have a whole bunch of ideas that they're thinking. For example, one of my colleagues whom I was talking to about an hour ago, he has this
Hmm.
brilliant idea of contactless visiting cards. And I told him when he pitched this idea to me, saying, look, I need this. Can you
Yeah.
get me one like today before I go to this meeting? Because then I can just show my phone and they would be able to get my contact details. I don't carry visiting cards. Now,
Mhm.
ideas like this are all over the place.
Right.
But given that base of ideas, sometimes when the conversations happen, and I think that's an important part, the connections strengthen. And
Correct.
sometimes the connections strengthen enough that they would just go to the next stage,
So they'll
which is,
cross the threshold.
yeah, somebody says, look, I started off the code, but I haven't done anything about it. Or I started off the analysis, but I haven't done anything about it. And then a
Mhm.
few more connections build. Somebody says, okay, I've created a crude prototype. I don't think it will go anywhere. At any point, there would be a pyramid of experiments at different stages. And eventually something just pops up. What I
Mhm.
think is what builds up a strong base is when there are enough connections and conversations, which is simply about somebody asking, what are you doing outside of what you're supposed to be doing? Or
Mhm.
what Google made famous with 20% time, for example.
Percent. Yeah.
And that builds this base and makes the pyramid taller. The
Mhm.
second thing that makes a difference in this is when one of these reaches the top, for someone to put together a structure around how to take it to the market and shape it in that direction. To be
Mhm.
fair, I think we've had a lot more success on the former than on the latter. There are many organizations who have had a lot more success on the latter than the former. The best
Mhm.
ones are, of course, those that get both right.
Right, right. Great, great. Thanks for sharing that. The other, interesting piece I see you doing. So I think it's probably because I subscribed to your blog at some point, but I get this annual reflections which you share. When did that start, and then how is it going for this year? What are some of the top of the things you are focusing on nowadays?
So I started this about 4, maybe 5 years ago,
Mhm.
and the intent was for me to, I mean, just to keep myself honest about the things that I want to do in that year,
Mhm.
and to share what I've learned in the process.
Right.
What I find is that sharing an email every year saying, "This is what I planned last year,
Yeah.
this is how it went, this is what I'm planning this year,"
Mhm.
means A, I get to reconnect with a lot of people that I haven't connected with otherwise.
Yeah.
B, I get to share from what I've learned, which I anyway enjoy doing. And
Mhm.
third, I put in a public commitment that next year I either have to go back to this audience shame face saying I didn't do it, or I better get it done. So
Mhm.
nothing else, it helps me. So this year I've taken on three things publicly and a couple of things privately.
Mhm.
One is to run 50 experiments and learn
Okay.
from them.
Mhm.
I, this was the same thing that I did last year. It
Yeah.
started and then fizzled out. Again, this
Right.
year it started well and fizzled
Mhm.
out. So,
Okay.
literally this week, I've had two conversations with a couple of friends and asking them, how does one build a habit of learning from experimentation? And I'm still struggling with it. But because this is something I know I will let everyone know at the end of the year, I
Mhm.
have a constant fear, drive, push.
Yeah.
Almost exactly like if I commit to a talk to learn, I
Yeah.
have to learn, right?
Right.
And this is one of those. Another which is coming along a little better is because the human brain really only uses 10% of conscious effort and 90% is shaped by the environment. My theory was if I use that 10% of conscious thinking to shape my environment instead of
The
it
other way. Mhm.
influencing me, that makes a huge difference. So, ranging from, for example, work out of a different place every day, meet a new person every day, listen to a
Mhm.
different genre of songs every day. So, the plan was every month I would run one of these changes in experiments. And
Mhm.
some of them have worked dramatically, like working out of a different place has made a huge difference, meeting new people has made a huge difference, listening to different song genres has not made that much of a difference, eating new kinds of food maybe at least now I have more places that I can eat at, so it's made partial difference. But this is one of those things where I'm at least slightly ahead on. But
Mhm.
that's the broad process where I commit, share, and use that feedback to improve.
And then what's the third public thing which you've taken up?
Calendar integrity, that is sticking to what I do. This is something that I used to do pretty well, but
Mhm.
last year I felt I slipped a little bit and took it
Okay.
up this year. But
Mhm.
like habits that one has learned once, it's kind of like
Mhm.
swimming. Once you've done it, you don't really forget. So I'm ignoring this because it's going so well that I'm not even tracking it.
Okay. Okay. Great. Great. And given you read so much, you obviously relate to books a lot. Have you considered writing a book on visualization? So, for example, this process which we talked about, uh, putting that in a kind of a practice book or a guidebook or a book of sorts.
I realized that writing a book is a lot of work and I get bored. And
Okay.
having said that, I discovered a few months ago that I have such a high level of cholesterol that my doctor almost got a heart attack. And she scared me enough that I really thought I was going to die. At which point I started thinking, okay, so if I have only a few months to live, then what do I want to do? Half the answer is probably nothing very different from what I really want to do. So one half of me just went back to watching Netflix.
Mhm.
But and the other half of me still was really scared. Said, okay, if I want to leave something behind, then it should be perhaps in the form of a book. And it
Mhm.
should perhaps be around something that I know better than many people, which includes visualization. Say, for example, how does one create an operational dashboard?
Yeah.
Uh, and that's now gotten to the top of my to-do list.
Okay.
But still is one of those things where even though I'm scared that I might die at any moment and I have to leave this behind for posterity and all of that, I'm not doing anything about it and I'm instead watching Netflix and Prime Video. So
Okay.
Have I thought about it? Yes, more so in recent times, but I'm still too lazy.
Got it. Got it. Great. And just as a closing question, right? So people who are, let's say, starting their career journeys today, uh, what would be your kind of maybe top two, three pieces of advice, or the other way to put is what would you advise your own younger self today, based on what you your perspective which you've gained over the years?
The two are somewhat different. So let me share what I would share perhaps as useful things for someone starting off on their career. The first is ex- play with what you like. What I mean by that is quite often people say, "Oh, I need problem sets to work on. I
Yeah.
need to figure out what I should learn." And my
Mhm.
suggestion on that is prioritize the things that you like first, simply because you'll find it easier to stick to it. Nothing more.
Correct. Mhm.
It's not that what you like is necessarily better for you. Quite often, what you like may be the worst thing for you. But whichever way it is, you're more likely to see it to closure than
Mhm.
the other way. And that is the simple benefit. And I think that's important,
Mhm.
meaning seeing things to closure. The second thing is learn by teaching.
Mhm.
There's a lot of stuff that you want to learn. Don't even bother trying to learn alone. Instead, commit to teaching somebody. That has three benefits. First, you're forced to learn.
Mhm.
Second, improves the level quality of learning to the point where you can get somebody else to explain it, which is a much higher level of learning.
Yeah.
Third, you will make some friends who owe you a favor, and that counts for a hell of a lot.
Right. Right.
But if I had to advise myself, say going back a generation, then what I might tell myself is don't get too fussed up about what's good or what's right. Quite often, bad can be good and good can be bad, meaning the very things that are the best things for you to do now are probably the worst things that you could do. Every single thing has a good and a bad. Just evaluate both sides of the coin. And this is partly because I would, by default, and I still do, find an answer to a question without acknowledging that an answer is just one way of looking at a question.
Mhm. Mhm. Interesting. Very interesting. Great. Thanks a lot, Anand, for your time. As usual, very insightful. I think a lot of learnings there for the community and anyone interested in that topic. I think this is almost like a gold mine of experience. So thanks a lot, and look forward to having you in future summits and events at Analytics with them.
Would love to. Thanks for the opportunity, Kunal.
Thank you. Thank you.